Hey guys, tonight we're squishing through the cold, wet underbelly of ancient North America, past tangled swamps, foggy marshes, and through ankle-deep mud that absolutely ruins your prehistoric shoes. Somewhere out there in the reeds, something enormous is watching you. It smells like pond water and sounds like soggy logs being crushed under 200 pounds of attitude. You're in giant beaver country now. This is a story about things that used to be much bigger, much wetter, and way more inconvenient to walk through. It's also about the strange, quiet power of wetlands and the massive rodents that once ruled them. Spoiler alert, they're extinct now. Which is probably a relief, because you probably wouldn't survive this timeline anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's see how weird this global sleepover gets. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're somewhere in what we now call the American Midwest, but don't expect to see cornfields. It's around 20,000 years ago, deep into the last ice age, and this place is a living sponge. You can't see your feet. Waterlogged plants tower around you, sedges, cattails, and ferns that don't know they're supposed to be extinct. The air is thick with buzzing insects the size of matchbooks, and something just moved in the water to your left. You freeze. There's a ripple, then another, and then nothing. Welcome to the Pleistocene. The land here is tired. It's been scraped raw by glaciers, then left to stew in its own juices for a few millennia. Picture a lumpy sponge dipped in cold tea. That's the terrain under you. Permafrost creeps just below the soil, but the surface is all mud and mush and decaying roots. Trees are stubby. The sky hangs low. Honestly, it's not the best vacation destination, but it is home to one of the weirdest cast members in North American history. You hear a thunk, then a splash. Then, rising just past the foggy reeds, a shape. Not a bear. Not a log. It's a beaver, but bigger than your car. It turns, shows you a flat tail the size of a canoe paddle, and then sinks back into the water like it has somewhere to be. Congratulations, you've just met Castroides ohioensis, the giant beaver. Not a creative name, but they weren't around to complain. This guy's roughly the size of a modern black bear, but built lower to the ground, like an overinflated meatloaf on four paws. You're not entirely sure what it eats, but it has huge front teeth, up to 6 inches long. And they're orange, like all respectable rodent teeth. A quick reminder, this is technically a rodent. The biggest North America's ever had. Take that, capybaras. You keep moving, slowly, past the edge of a shallow oxbow lake. The giant beaver isn't alone. Somewhere nearby is a herd of mastodons stomping through the underbrush, a few wolves pretending they aren't following you, and a sloth the size of a minivan scratching its butt on a tree stump. This was a weird time. Everyone was either giant, extinct, or about to be. Here's the thing. Most of North America didn't look like the movies make it seem. This wasn't all wide open plains and howling wolves. Much of the land was soggy, clogged with vegetation, and hard to navigate. And that's exactly what giant beavers needed. They were built for this. Massive bodies helped conserve heat. Their flat tails may have helped steer them underwater. And those comically huge teeth? Perfect for gnawing roots and branches. Though, historians still argue whether they actually used them to cut trees down like modern beavers do. Some think they just munched on aquatic plants and hung out in ready-made wetlands without bothering to do any real construction. Let's talk about those wetlands for a second. Picture an area the size of modern-day France, but basically one giant puddle. Lakes, ponds, rivers, swamps. It was a mess in the most biodiverse way possible. Plants that thrived in muck, bugs that thrived on plants, birds that thrived on bugs, and big, furry, paddle-tailed rodents that just thrived. These wetlands formed partly because glaciers had bulldozed the land flat, leaving behind thousands of depressions that filled with meltwater. That's what we now call the prairie pothole region. But in the Pleistocene, it was more like the planet puddle. You slog forward, squinting through mosquito fog. There's movement again. This time, it's babies. Giant beaver kits, bumbling behind their massive mom like fuzzy ottomans on tiny legs. You feel a tug in your chest because yeah, even prehistoric rodents can be cute. Suddenly, the ground shifts under your feet. You almost faceplant. It's not solid, it's floating peat. And that's not good. Peatlands form when plant material builds up faster than it decays. In these cold, wet conditions, decomposition slows down. So everything just piles up. Moss on moss. Roots and roots. It's like walking on a giant compost mattress. Creepy bonus. Some of the plants you're stepping on died 10,000 years ago and still haven't broken down. Great for preserving things. Terrible for hiking. Also, dangerous. People have straight up disappeared into peat bogs, even in modern times. Which is why you don't wander off. Not unless you want to be the next archaeological headline. Well-preserved time traveler found clutching smartphone. Anyway, you're still shadowing that giant beaver family. They've found a wide, shallow pool with good vegetation. No predators nearby. The mother glides in, barely making a ripple. The babies tumble in after her like little kayaks. They'll eat, groom, play, then rest on a mud bank while chewing on roots like it's a spa day. And you? You're left wondering how these creatures vanished. But not just yet, we'll get to their extinction later. Right now, just soak in the scene. Water gurgles. A frog blurts out a noise like a sneezing duck. Overhead, a marsh hawk circles. You lie back on a patch of moss and stare at the gray sky. It's all quiet now, except for the hum of life. The Pleistocene isn't rushing. It never did. One more weird detail while we're here. These swamps stored a lot of carbon. The buildup of undecomposed plant matter meant these ancient wetlands were like huge batteries for climate gases. Some of that carbon's still trapped in ancient muck, deep below your head right now. If it ever gets released, well, let's just say the weather apps won't be thrilled. But that's for another time. Right now, you close your eyes, let the beaver kit splash nearby, and breathe in 20,000-year-old air that somehow smells like every aquarium gift shop you've ever been to. Don't worry. You'll survive this section. Maybe. You're lying there in the swampy stillness, and for a second, you forget you're even in the past. It's just wet smells, buzzing insects, and the soft lapping of water. But then you hear it again, that dull thunk. A sound that's not quite natural. Like something big just body slammed a log. You lift your head, and there it is again. The giant beaver. Castroides ohioensis, in the damp, heavy flesh. It's wading out of the water now, hauling its bulk across a mud-slicked bank. And this thing is huge. Not just, I could ride it like a pony huge. More like, it would definitely total your sedan huge. About 7 to 8 feet long, up to 200 pounds, and shaped like a torpedo crossed with a sofa. Let's be clear, this is not a cute mascot beaver. This is not a dam-building, tree-chomping cartoon. This thing has the body of a barrel, the head of an angry guinea pig, and teeth, good grief, those teeth. The incisors are long, orange, curved, and razor-sharp. Each one is nearly as long as your hand and slightly chisel-shaped. Not buck teeth. Wall-destroying tools. You can actually hear them grind together as the beaver chews on a root the size of your thigh like it's chewing gum. And yet, it's not aggressive. It doesn't charge. It doesn't hiss. It just goes about its business, ignoring you entirely like you're beneath its notice. That tracks. It probably sees you the same way modern squirrels see statues, vaguely annoying and not worth investigating. Despite their size, there's no solid evidence that these giant beavers were dangerous to humans. They didn't have claws worth mentioning, weren't known for aggression, and weren't built to chase anything that moved faster than a drifting lily pad. Still, you keep a respectful distance. It's not just because of the teeth, it's the attitude. Giant beavers have that same slow, confident presence you see in bison or elephants. Like they know this world is built for them, and they don't need to prove anything. Now here's something weird. For years, paleontologists assumed these megarodents must have built dams like their modern relatives. Makes sense, right? Beavers build dams. Big beavers build big dams. But here's the twist. No one has ever found direct fossil evidence of a Castroids dam. Historians still argue whether they were actual engineers or just took advantage of existing wetlands. Some think they lacked the brain power or the dental geometry to cut down full trees. Others argue they didn't need to. They lived in a landscape so soggy and riddled with natural ponds and streams that architecture wasn't necessary. Why build a house when the hotel's already free? You creep forward and crouch behind a rotting log. There's another giant beaver nearby. This one's older. You can tell by the way its fur looks patchy and its movements are slower. It drags itself up onto a bank and settles into the mud with the same energy as someone collapsing onto a couch after a long day of pretending to be productive. You wonder how they communicated. Modern beavers slap their tails on water to signal danger. Did castroids do the same? No one knows. Their tails were wide and flat, but shaped a bit differently, more oval, less paddle. Some researchers think they didn't slap at all. Others say that's nonsense. A tail like that is practically begging to be smacked on something. It's one of those small mysteries lost to time, like whether Roman soldiers really marched in perfect silence, or if dinosaurs actually made those Jurassic Park roars. They probably didn't. It's likely most of them honked like very angry geese. Anyway, back to your mud-slicked friend. It's chewing something now, looks like the root of a water lily. You watch the teeth at work again, this time up close. And it hits you. These are not tree-cutting teeth. Not really. They're more shovel than saw. They seem better suited for ripping through soft vegetation than slicing wood. One more reason to believe the dam builder theory might be overhyped. But here's the kicker, those massive jaws? Paired with skulls that were kind of basic. Giant beavers had flatter skulls and smaller brains relative to body size than modern beavers. Which is saying something because modern beavers are no Einsteins to begin with. That might explain the lack of engineering. Modern beavers build dams not out of architectural flair, but survival instinct. They want to raise the water level around their lodges to keep out predators. It's smart, sure, but it's also just really strong programming. Giant beavers might not have had that instinct, or maybe they just didn't need it. They already had size. They already had water. Why waste energy building a condo? And while you're considering that, a long, low-grown rolls out over the wetland. It's not the beaver. It's something bigger. You duck. In the distance, half shrouded by fog, you spot a shape. Slope back. Tusks curling like Gothic architecture. A mastodon. And you suddenly realize the giant beaver is not even close to the biggest thing out here. You're standing in what scientists now call a megafaunal hotspot. North America during the Ice Age was ridiculous in the best way. Camels, horses, short-faced bears, giant armadillos, and towering ground sloths the size of delivery trucks. Oh, and saber-toothed cats, because apparently the regular kind just weren't stressful enough. Castroids lived alongside all of them. Which raises another question. What kept them alive? It wasn't speed. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't camouflage. You can't exactly hide when your rear end could be used as a patio table. The answer? Probably the same thing that keeps hippos alive today. Habitat. Swamps are hard to chase things through. The mud slows predators. The dense vegetation blocks sight. The water makes escape easier. As long as they stayed in the marsh, they were fine. Once they wandered out, well, that's when things got risky. There are bite marks on some castroids' fossils. Possibly wolf. Possibly bear. Possibly human. We'll get into that later. For now, you watch as a juvenile beaver awkwardly slips into the shallows and begins paddling in a wide circle. Its body moves with slow, confident grace, a little like a living canoe that doesn't care what you think. Here's a quirky little twist. Giant beavers had unusually long femurs, leg bones that were both thick and extended. That may have helped them wade and paddle, but it also gave them an almost comical hip-heavy shape, kind of like a furry pair on stilts. And their tails? Not just for swimming. Some researchers think they may have helped with thermoregulation, like an external radiator. Others think they were used in mating displays. Hey girl, check out this tail surface area. But again, we're guessing. Fossils don't come with user manuals. Time passes. The light begins to dim, which in the Ice Age usually means either it's late afternoon or a blizzard's thinking about it. Either way, the beavers begin to retreat toward deeper water. You hear another thunk, then a splash. The family submerges, one by one, tails flipping lazily like they're clocking out of the world's slowest shift. You stay a while longer, watching the ripples fade. That's the thing about these animals. They didn't need to be dramatic. No high-speed chases. No territorial duels. They just were. Big, strange, low-key survivors in a soggy, forgotten world. You sit back in the reeds and think about how weird it is that nobody really talks about them. Everyone remembers the mammoths and saber-tooths. But this was a walking contradiction. A rodent that weighed as much as an NFL linebacker, lived like a swamp monk, and vanished without a big extinction headline. And yet, it mattered. It helped shape the wetlands. Its poop fed the soil. Its chewing shaped the plants. Its very presence kept predators wary and ecosystems balanced. You feel a breeze now, cool and damp, carrying the smell of wet roots and distant rain. It smells old, like something left behind in a forgotten cellar. You close your eyes and listen. You hear frogs, wind in cattails. Somewhere, something splashes. Maybe a fish, maybe a beaver, maybe your imagination. You don't open your eyes. Let the water carry you for a while. You're back in the wetland, sinking slightly into the cold, muddy ground, and your feet are starting to feel like forgotten leftovers in a slush puddle. Somewhere nearby, another thunk. It's a sound you're starting to get used to, quiet, heavy, and somehow deliberate. You're beginning to suspect these massive beavers have a routine. And now you're wondering, did they build dams? Let's break it down. You've seen the teeth. You've watched them glide around like swamp furniture. And you've noticed how lazy they seem. Not in a bad way, just in that serene, I don't need to hustle way that only apex swamp dwellers have. So the question becomes, were they nature's engineers, or just very big squatters? Modern beavers? Total overachievers. They cut trees with those orange chainsaw teeth, build dams from logs, mud, and the tears of property developers, and reshape entire landscapes. They build multi-chambered lodges with underwater entrances and air vents. It's impressive, but also very extra. Giant beavers, on the other hand? Not so much. There's no fossil evidence of dam structures associated with Castroides ohioensis. Nothing. Not a single ancient timber pile, no stacked sticks, no lodge foundations, no beaver blueprints. Historians still argue whether that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, or just bad luck. Maybe their wooden structures decomposed. Maybe they built differently. Maybe they didn't build at all. You trudge past a fallen log and nearly slip, because under your feet is a thick layer of plant mush, likely the floor of an ancient beaver feeding spot. But again, no signs of construction. Just chewed vegetation and a lot of soggy footprints. Some researchers believe their skull shape tells the story. Giant beavers had narrower brain cases than modern beavers, with less pronounced cranial crests for jaw muscle attachment. Translation? They weren't quite built for the fine motor control lifestyle of dam construction. In fact, their teeth, those huge, orange monsters, were shaped more like ice picks than the flat, chisel-like cutters of modern Castor canadensis. Great for stabbing into bark and tearing soft plant matter. Terrible for precision woodwork. So what does that mean? You're looking at a creature that's beaver-shaped, but doesn't act like one. It's a little like finding out koalas are marsupials that mostly sleep and scream, and suddenly you're rethinking all your childhood picture books. Giant beavers seem to have relied entirely on naturally wet environments. They didn't need to modify streams. They just found the swampiest spots and moved in. Think of it like squatting in a house someone else already flooded. Why do the work when nature's done it for you? That said, they weren't entirely idle. There's evidence, like worn-down incisor surfaces and path-like gaps in dense vegetation, that suggests they did interact with their environment. But it seems more likely they were foragers, not architects. One quirky theory even suggests they might have lived in burrows dug into soft riverbanks, kind of like massive muskrats. But again, no burrows have been found, so it's all speculation. For now, the best guess is that they made nests out of reeds and mud in secluded patches of swamp. Not exactly a luxury condo, but enough to keep predators at bay and the kits dry. Speaking of kits, you watch one now, smaller, about the size of a golden retriever, flopping around in the shallows with the grace of a wet mattress. It's adorable in that awkward, too big for its own legs way. It tries to pick up a branch in its teeth, then drops it, then picks it up again. The branch isn't for building anything. It's just chewing practice. Or maybe it's a toy. You'll never know. You sit back and stare out at the water. It's still and green, covered in floating plant matter. A perfect beaver paradise. But now imagine what it would look like if modern beavers moved in here. Within weeks, you'd have dams, diverted streams, deeper ponds, and a whole architectural movement in progress. Not here. Not with the giants. They're like the swamp monks of the Pleistocene, big, chill, and content to let the world flow around them. Still, there's that gnawing debate. Could they have built dams? Some paleoecologists argue they must have done something. There's a principle in science called functional analogs. If two animals look very similar and occupy the same ecological niche, they probably had similar behavior. So if it walks like a beaver and quacks like a beaver, maybe it dammed like a beaver? But here's where that idea starts to fall apart. The shape of the front teeth is wrong. The placement of the eyes and ears suggests less awareness of surface activity. Modern beavers have eyes and nostrils high on their heads so they can peek above water while mostly submerged. Giant beavers? Lower set, more forward-facing. Like a swimmer who forgot their goggles. Even their tail might have been different. Some fossil reconstructions show it as more narrow and oval, not the wide, flat paddle we associate with today's beavers. That could mean it wasn't used for slapping water or steering. Or maybe it just wasn't as efficient. All of this paints a picture of an animal that wasn't interested in changing its environment, just existing within it. A floater, not a fixer. And yet, nature doesn't waste niches for long. As the Ice Age ended and giant beavers began to disappear, modern beavers moved in and started doing all the things their giant cousins apparently didn't. They built. They engineered. They transformed entire ecosystems. Which raises a fun thought. Maybe the niche existed before the behavior. Maybe it took the extinction of castroids to leave enough wetland real estate open for modern beavers to move in and start innovating. You splash through a deeper channel now, shoes lost to the muck hours ago. The light is shifting again, late afternoon or maybe just cloud-thick dusk. You notice something strange about the trees here. They're young, but flexible, which is exactly the kind of vegetation that does not get cut down by massive rodents. Another sign they weren't builders. They didn't deforest. Modern beavers leave behind stumps like a chainsaw massacre. This place? The trees are intact, undisturbed, at peace. It's a quiet moment, until, yep, another thunk. You don't even flinch anymore. It's background noise now, like a wetland heartbeat. Here's a final thought before the day fades. Even if they didn't build dams, giant beavers still shaped their world. Their grazing affected what plants grew. Their waste fertilized the soil. Their presence influenced predator movement. Construction or not, they mattered. You find a dry patch, look drier, and sit. The air smells like wet bark and old leaves. The sounds of frogs and insects fill the space around you, like static from a long-forgotten radio. You close your eyes. Let the beavers drift through your thoughts. No dams. No lodges. Just slow, steady gliders in a green-brown world that doesn't ask much of anyone. Not everything that survives needs to build. Sometimes just existing, just floating, just chewing, just being, is enough. You wake up, figuratively, because hopefully you're dozing off to this, and you're still in the muck. Still surrounded by a prehistoric wetland that seems determined to steal your boots and your dignity. Everything around you squishes. The air has that damp, fermented vegetation smell that would make a compost pile blush. And here's what hits you now. This place is massive. You're not just in a patch of wet ground or some lazy little pond. You're standing in what used to be a continent-wide swamp system that stretched from what's now the Yukon all the way down to the Gulf Coast. If you were to take a drone up, assuming your battery could survive the Ice Age humidity, you'd see a mosaic of lakes, marshes, floodplains, and peat bogs connected like veins on a leaf. The whole center of North America? One slow-draining, gloriously inefficient waterlogged sprawl. Historians still argue whether this wetland dominance was more a product of glacial meltwater, slow drainage, or just the absence of people digging ditches and rerouting rivers. The answer is probably yes to all of it. But you don't care about technicalities right now. You're busy not getting eaten by a snapping turtle the size of a carry-on suitcase. The point is, the wetlands ruled. And giant beavers weren't outliers. They were symptoms of the sogginess. Their bodies made sense here. Dense bones to help them sink, thick fur to handle the cold, lungs that could hold breath for minutes at a time. If this was an evolutionary job market, they got hired on the spot. You slosh your way through another channel and end up on a hummock, a tiny, slightly raised island made of twisted roots and half-rotted logs. It's the driest ground you've seen in hours. Congratulations, you've reached the highlands. Elevation, maybe 3 feet. From here, you can see the broader landscape. It's not just trees and water. There are vast stretches of reeds, rushes, sedges, all those plants you usually ignore at the edge of ponds, but here they're 7 feet tall and buzzing with insects. You spot a heron-like bird take off, wings flapping in slow motion like it forgot how air works. And here's the wild part. This ecosystem worked. It was stable, self-regulating. Plants filtered water. Wetland soil trapped carbon. Insects fed fish, fish fed birds, birds pooped everywhere and kept the cycle going. The giant beavers fit in like couch cushions on a waterbed, awkward, but weirdly perfect. You push on, slogging through a cypress grove. The trees look alien, knees of root systems jutting out like knobby elbows, trunks covered in moss and old scars from animals you'll never meet. Water reflects the trees upside down, making the whole place feel doubled. You half expect to see another version of yourself sloshing backward in the mirror image world. There's a sound, a low rumble. Not thunder. Not an animal. It's the wetlands themselves. Moving. Draining. Breathing. This landscape is alive, and not in a poetic, nature is beautiful way. In a literal, wetland goo has internal currents kind of way. And you know what makes it more unsettling? This entire system, the swamps, the bogs, the beavers, used to cover millions of square miles. We're talking the Mississippi River Basin, the Great Lakes region, the entire southeastern United States. From Florida's mangroves to the Canadian tundra, everything was connected by water and the creatures that sloshed through it. Want a weird fact? Scientists believe these interconnected wetlands might have been one of the largest carbon sinks in the Western Hemisphere. All that plant matter breaking down slowly, not quite decaying, just kind of becoming sludge. Which, ecologically, is a win. Sludge means stored carbon. Stored carbon means cooler temperatures. Of course, it also means walking around smells like hot compost stew. But you get used to it. Kind of. You pause now because the light's shifting. The fog is thinning, and shafts of pale sun break through in quiet, almost holy beams. And through one of them, you see a herd of animals. Something in the deer family. Maybe. No, bigger. Possibly Serval's Scotty, a now extinct stag moose that had antlers like satellite dishes and a personality like a distracted librarian. They step carefully through the muck, like even they don't fully trust the ground. A baby stag moose locks eyes with you, chews a lily pad with the intensity of someone taking a standardized test, and then moves on. You're invisible again. You sit. You breathe. You listen. The wind rustles reeds. Water trickles from somewhere. The beavers are around here, but you don't see them. You just feel them. Their presence is baked into the landscape, like the smell of a house where someone used to cook a lot of bacon. Here's a thing people forget. Wetlands don't just absorb water. They move it. Slowly. Subtly. In ways that would make civil engineers cry. A raindrop that falls into the northern part of this prehistoric sponge might take weeks, to make it 10 miles. Everything's slow. Gentle. Reluctant. Like trying to get a teenager to clean their room. You start to feel the same way. Your heartbeat slows. Your footsteps drag. Your body takes on that wetland rhythm. Quiet, thick, drifting. And now you think about all the other creatures who lived here alongside the giant beavers. Not just the headline megafauna, but the side characters, the bugs, the birds, the amphibians, the odd little proto-rodents skittering through the underbrush. Some survived into the present. Some didn't. One fun tidbit. There's fossil evidence of a species of marsh rabbit that likely coexisted with castoroids, and it had enormous hind legs, like a swamp kangaroo. To leap across the soggier bits. Wetlands may have literally shaped the muscles of their residents. You'd adapt, too, if every day felt like trying to cross a room full of waterbeds and sucks. You're thinking now about just how many people today live on top of where this ancient wetland used to be. Cities built on drained marshes. Fields planted in places where water once ruled. Shopping malls over swamp ghosts. And under it all, that old, buried landscape, compressed, drowned, and full of secrets. You shift your weight and feel the squelch beneath you. Yeah, it's still there. And it remembers. One last image before this section fades. You're looking out over a wide, still expanse of water. The sun is dipping low. Everything glows gold and gray. And from the far bank, almost like an echo, a ripple spreads. Then another. Then silence. You don't see the beaver this time. But you know it saw you. You're deep in it now, waist high in water, mud clinging to your legs like prehistoric leggings no one asked for. And just when you think this place can't get any more absurd, you round a clump of cattails and freeze. Because standing across the water, framed in the early morning mist, is the cast of a Pleistocene fever dream. A mastodon, massive, woolly, and spectacularly unimpressed with your existence, lumbers through a thicket of shrubs. Its tusks curve forward like oversized banana peels, its body a walking mountain of fur and slow breathing. Next to it, smaller, ganglier, and somehow even grumpier looking. A juvenile that keeps tripping over its own feet. You stifle a laugh, but it's all air. You're not trying to get trampled. You've entered the full-on Pleistocene menagerie now. You want big? How about a megatherium? A ground sloth that makes the mastodon look agile. It moves like a fridge trying to remember why it entered the room, and it stops to scratch itself against a tree with enough force to knock bark off. Its claws look like gardening tools. You do not want to be on the wrong end of its bad day. And you're not alone out here. The swamps are busy. There's movement in every direction. Fur, feathers, scales. A dire wolf trotting along the edge of the water, lean and low. A flock of giant storks picking at whatever the water serves up. A saber-toothed cat watching you from the reeds like it's deciding whether you're a meal or just another tourist. This is what the giant beavers lived with. Not alone. Not special. Just one oddball species in a whole cast of oversized, mildly ridiculous animals all trying to make life work in a soggy world. And the thing is, they all fit. Wetlands are weird like that. They make room for everything. Big herbivores feed on aquatic plants. Predators patrol the banks. Insects swarm, fish jump, birds nest. And in the middle of it all, you've got the beaver, quiet, semi-aquatic, minding its business. Compared to the mastodons and saber-tooths, it seems kind of unremarkable. But don't be fooled. That giant beaver played a key role. It helped keep the food web connected by moving nutrients, trimming vegetation, and fertilizing the muck with its, well, contributions. Plus, it was a snack option for more than one of the toothier species around here. Let's talk predators for a second. There's a debate. Historians still argue whether castoroids had any major natural predators or if its size was enough to keep it mostly safe. The evidence is spotty, but we do know that large carnivores were around. Dire wolves, short-faced bears, American lions. These weren't your average apex predators. They were huge, fast, and terrifyingly adapted. Imagine a short-faced bear charging through the wetland after a beaver. Actually, it's not good for your blood pressure. Still, most of those predators preferred the drier edges. Swamps are great for hiding but not ideal for sprinting. And a 200-pound beaver in open water is a tricky target. Not defenseless, but probably not worth the chase if you're trying to conserve calories. Then there's the weirdos. You see one now, just a flicker of motion in the corner of your vision. You turn. It's a Milohyas, an extinct genus of peccary that looks like someone gave a pig a gym membership and a bad attitude. These things rooted through wetland edges and may have gotten into it with beavers over space or food. Or maybe they just ignored each other. No one really knows. The fossil record's a little vague on the gossip. And look over there, Platygonus, another prehistoric peccary, walking like it owns the place. Technically, it kind of did. You step forward, and your foot squelches into something softer than mud. You don't want to know what it is. Could be ancient leaf mush. Could be let's go with leaf mush. The sunlight breaks through again, and for a moment, everything around you glows. You can see dragonflies with wingspans the size of dinner plates. A turtle basks on a log like it invented stillness. In the distance, another castor-oids glides silently through the water, barely rippling the surface. It's graceful, in that heavy, stubborn way that only big animals in their natural habitat can manage. And here's a detail you didn't expect. Fossilized stomach contents from related extinct rodents suggest a diet full of aquatic plants. That lines up with what you've seen. No woodcutting, just roots, tubers, water lilies. A swamp vegan, based. One fringe theory even suggests that giant beavers might have practiced seasonal migration, not across continents, but shifting their home territories slightly depending on water levels and plant growth. No proof, of course. Just an idea. But it makes sense. This ecosystem didn't stay put. It expanded and shrank with the climate. Lakes dried. Marshes formed. And the animals had to move or starve. So you walk. You walk along a game trail carved by generations of feet, hoof prints, claw marks, and giant beaver tracks all overlapping like nature's version of footnotes. You run your hand along a tree trunk scarred by something tall and tusked. You crouch by a pool and watch minnows dart through sunlit shallows. You're surrounded by life, but it's quiet. Not silent, just subdued. The kind of stillness where everything is listening. And then off in the distance, you hear it, a splash. Followed by another. Not the dainty plop of frogs or the quiet dip of birds. This is heavy, deliberate, synchronized. You creep forward, and there they are. A whole family of castor-oids, 5 or 6 adults, all moving in the same direction. Maybe heading to deeper water. Maybe following food. Maybe just avoiding you. They move like a school of submarines, slow, precise, unbothered. You stay frozen, letting the scene play out. One turns its head and looks directly at you. Its eyes are small, dark, and glinting with something you can't quite read. Intelligence? Curiosity? Total indifference? Then it turns away, tail slicing the water behind it, and the group vanishes beneath the reeds. Just like that gone. You're left standing on a patch of squishy ground, surrounded by an ecosystem that doesn't exist anymore. And it strikes you, none of these animals thought they were special. They weren't trying to make history. They just lived. Mated. Wondered. Sometimes they got eaten. Sometimes they didn't. They weren't symbols of extinction or relics of climate change. They were just animals. Perfectly adapted to a world that no longer fits our maps. You sit again. Watch the steam rise off the water. You think about how this whole swamp, this entire bizarre network of plants and beasts, worked for thousands of years, without agriculture, without roads, without us. And somehow, that's the most peaceful thought of all. You're back on that hummock, the slightly elevated patch of moss and root that's barely keeping your backside dry, and staring at the entrance to a shallow cave carved into the bank of a creek. Doesn't look like much. A few slabs of rock, some dried mud, and a musty smell like someone stored their damp socks there for 10,000 years. Which, honestly, they might have. You duck your head and crawl in. The air inside is cool and still. There's no sound but your own breath and the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the limestone. As your eyes adjust to the dimness, something on the wall catches your attention. It's a painting. Or maybe a smudge. Hard to tell. You move closer. It's a beaver? No, not a modern one. This thing's huge. Blocky body, long teeth, a tail like a spatula. You lean in. Next to it, stick figures with spears. One of them's upside down. Maybe dead. Maybe just artistic flair. You sit back and try to picture it. A human, thousands of years ago, painting this scene by torchlight, maybe with fingers stained by charcoal and ochre. Maybe they'd just seen the animal. Maybe they'd eaten one. Or maybe they were warning others. Big rodent here. Looks harmless. Not. See, we found cave art around the world depicting all kinds of extinct megafauna, mammoths, lions, aurochs. But beavers? Rare. Still, there are hints. In some North American petroglyphs, there are carvings of animals with wide tails and rodent-like bodies. Nothing conclusive. But then again, nothing about this time period is. Historians still argue whether early humans in North America hunted giant beavers, revered them, or mostly ignored them. The fossil record isn't generous with answers. A few castoroid skeletons show cut marks that suggest butchering. One even has signs of having been roasted. And let's be honest, if you were a hungry Ice Age human and you spotted a slow-moving 200-pound beaver waddling near a marsh, that's dinner. But there's another possibility: they were admired. Many indigenous cultures in later eras viewed beavers as more than animals. They were builders, shapeshifters, sometimes even creators. In some Algonquian myths, a great beaver helps form the world by diving to the bottom of the ocean to retrieve mud. In others, beavers are tricksters, architects, even symbols of hard work and persistence. Now imagine how those stories might have started. Not with the small beavers we know now, but with these monsters. Creatures so big they left tracks the size of dinner plates, vanished into the water like ghosts, and built nothing. Mysterious, silent, and gone before the stories could be written down. You move deeper into the cave. The paintings become clearer. Another giant animal, maybe a mammoth, maybe something else entirely, next to a human with wide hands and a crescent-shaped tool. Further in you find bones. Small ones. Probably not beaver. But you don't stay long. Something about this place makes time feel thick. You crawl back out and blink into daylight. The wetlands have shifted. The water's higher now, creeping closer to the cave mouth. A dragonfly lands on your knee like it owns the place. You swat it lazily and think about that painting. Here's the thing. We think of early humans as primitive. Spear chuckers, cave dwellers, loincloth wearers. But they were observant. They understood their world far better than we understand ours. If a giant beaver lived nearby, they knew it. They tracked its patterns, its moods, its movement through the landscape. They'd have known where it nested, where it fed, what it feared. They probably didn't call it a giant beaver. They had their own names, their own classifications. Not scientific, but functional. Maybe water walker, or mud shadow, or the one with teeth. And yet, not much survives of those names. Language is fragile. It doesn't fossilize. So we're left with bones, paintings, and guesses. One thing we do know, the timing overlaps. Giant beavers were still alive when the first humans arrived in North America. There's no getting around that. Whether they coexisted for centuries or only a few brief generations, it happened. And that's where things get speculative. Some scientists argue that human hunting helped drive castoroids to extinction. Others say climate change did it. Others still think it was both. You'll get more of that debate later, don't worry. But for now, just sit with the idea that the last people to see a living giant beaver weren't scientists or time travelers. They were hunter-gatherers with sharp eyes and sharper memories. You move along the creek now, following a narrow trail flattened by centuries of passing feet and paws. The air is thick with pollen. Bees drift lazily between swamp flowers. Everything buzzes with life. And somewhere, under the surface, a beaver is chewing on something you'll never see. You stop at a tree, half dead, hollowed out, marked by scratches. Maybe from claws. Maybe from antlers. Hard to say. But inside, wedged into a crook of the trunk, something gleams. You reach in and pull out a smooth piece of bone. Shaped, polished. Not from a beaver, too small, but clearly worked by human hands. Maybe a tool. Maybe a carving. Maybe it once belonged to someone who watched the same swamp, saw the same animals, and felt the same weird mix of awe and inconvenience. Here's a fun fringe theory. Some anthropologists believe early humans used giant beaver bones for ritual purposes. Not just tools, but amulets, charms, maybe even relics. But because bones that big felt important. They stood out. They held stories. We don't know if it's true, but it wouldn't be surprising. Humans have always assigned meaning to things that don't quite fit the mold. A rodent the size of a bear? That's going to get a reaction. You sit again by the creek. Watch the water. Listen to the distant rustle of reeds. You wonder if some young hunter sat here 12,000 years ago, chewing on a root, staring at the same muddy bank, and thinking, I hope that giant thing doesn't notice me. You're crouched low in the reeds now, water soaking into your knees, but you don't move. Not because you're especially patient, but because something's watching. You feel it. The hairs on your arms know before your eyes do. Then, across the clearing, just at the edge of the marsh, movement. Something big. Something quiet. You squint through the cattails. It's not a beaver this time. The shape's wrong. Too tall, too lean. It moves with a kind of lazy precision, muscle rippling under mottled fur, paws like snowshoes pressing into the soft ground without a sound. You're looking at a predator, and not the kind you'd want to meet without a solid tree nearby. Probably a dire wolf. Or a short-faced bear, if the universe really wants to mess with you. See, the Pleistocene wasn't just about big plant eaters. Sure, you had your mammoths, your ground sloths, your giant beavers waddling around like overgrown ottomans, but what made it interesting was what hunted them. Let's break it down. The cast of killers back then was stacked. Dire wolves, bigger than today's gray wolves, with crushing jaws and pack tactics that make them the original nightmare fuel. Saber-toothed cats, yeah, those guys, lurking in tall grass like murder statues with 11-inch knives hanging from their faces. American lions, bigger than African ones, possibly faster. Even the occasional otlotl-wielding human, if we're being honest. And then you've got the short-faced bear. Imagine a grizzly on stilts with a mean streak and no chill whatsoever. These things could stand 12 feet tall, run faster than you'd like, and probably smell your fear from across a lake. And they weren't shy. They didn't hide. They owned the landscape. So, what does this mean for our oversized aquatic rodent friend? Well, it wasn't exactly at the top of the food chain. The giant beaver, Castroides ohioensis, was big. Impressive teeth? Absolutely. But those teeth were for plants, not self-defense. Its limbs weren't built for sprinting, and its tail wasn't a weapon. It didn't have the bite force or aggression of its predators. What it had, mostly, was water. Swamps, lakes, marshes. Escape routes. But even those only go so far. There are signs in the fossil record, bitten bones, scattered skeletons, that hint at violent ends. A few Castroids fossils show puncture marks. Others are found near predator dens, broken and discarded like leftovers. One particularly grim site has the partial skeleton of a giant beaver next to what looks like dire wolf remains. Some paleontologists think it was a kill site. Others say it could have just been bad luck. Either way, someone didn't walk away. And here's where things get murky. Historians still argue whether predators routinely hunted giant beavers, or if they were more opportunistic, taking down the sick, the old, or the unlucky. After all, wrestling a 200-pound semi-aquatic rodent out of a swamp isn't a simple task, even for a pack of wolves, especially when there are easier snacks around. But predators are patient and creative. There's a theory, fringe, but not insane, that some predators may have learned to ambush beavers during drought seasons, when the water levels dropped and escape got harder. A dry marsh is a death trap when you're built for paddling, not sprinting. Now, let's zoom out a bit. Imagine the dynamics. A herd of mastodons lumbers through the trees. Saber-tooths skulk nearby. In the shallows, giant beavers munch on aquatic plants, always one startled splash away from safety. Overhead, vultures circle. On the horizon, smoke, maybe from a wildfire, maybe from a human camp. The ecosystem is alive with tension. Every creature plays its role. Every movement, every scent, every muddy footprint means something to someone. And you, sitting in the reeds, are starting to get the sense that this world didn't care much for comfort. It was wild, raw, and not interested in your survival odds. One light joke per 1,000 words? Sure. But here, survival is the joke. You shift slightly and a frog launches itself off your boot, landing with a splash. The motion startles something nearby. You catch a glimpse, a wet, hulking figure slipping into the water. Giant beaver. Gone in seconds. No drama. No fanfare. That's the thing. Despite their size, these animals weren't aggressive. They didn't posture or fight. They didn't have to. Their defense was silence, submersion, and the dense thickets of wetland camouflage. But when predators got close enough, all that changed. Sometimes stealth works. Sometimes it just delays the inevitable. Which brings us to the human element. Early humans didn't have claws or fangs or sprinting speed. But they had fire, weapons, teamwork. And over time, they became the most efficient predator on the planet. Whether they hunted castoroids regularly is still debated. Some argue that humans likely focused on easier prey. But the overlap in time and space makes contact inevitable. And when food was scarce, nothing was off-limits. Plus, you've got to consider, people talk. They share stories. And what do you think would make a better tale around a campfire? A fish, or a rodent the size of a small couch that nearly drowned your uncle? Exactly. You stand now, knees aching from crouching. The sun has shifted. The marsh is golden with evening light. Birds scream at each other in a way that sounds personal. You stretch and move toward higher ground. On your way, you spot something wedged between two stones. A tooth. Massive, slightly curved, ridged like a crude chisel. Not human. Not predator. Beaver. You turn it in your hand and wonder, was this from one that got away? Or one that didn't? There's a quiet dignity in prey animals. We tend to focus on predators because they're flashy. But survival, actual survival, isn't about chasing things. It's about evading, enduring, adapting. Castoroids didn't need to be fierce. It just needed to outlast the danger. To be too fast for a bear, too wet for a wolf, too elusive for a spear. It didn't always work. But sometimes it did. And every time it did, it meant one more night. One more belly full of lily roots. One more trail of bubbles slipping beneath the moonlit swamp. You keep walking. The trees thin out, and the horizon opens. A long, low stretch of black water lies ahead, thick with reeds and ghostly mist. Something splashes out in the middle. Probably nothing. Probably. And even now, you can't quite shake the feeling that something is watching you this time. You wake up to dry ground beneath your feet. Strange, after all that squelching through swamps. No reeds brushing your arms, no frogs croaking underfoot. Just grass, short, trimmed, forgettable. The kind of land that's been managed. It doesn't smell like mud or decay or anything wild. It smells like lawnmowers and maybe fertilizer. And that's the thing, you're still walking across the ancient wetlands. They're just gone. You're in the same place, technically. But where the marsh once stretched for miles, home to giant beavers, aquatic grasses, and gurgling peat bogs, you now see suburbs. Barns. Soybeans. A tractor hums in the distance like a mechanical wasp, dragging a cloud of dust behind it. What happened? Well, the short version, humans dried it out. Systematically. Relentlessly. For centuries. Let's go back a bit. After the Ice Age loosened its grip and the megafauna began to disappear, what was left behind in places like the Midwest and parts of Canada was a massive expanse of soggy, low-lying land. We're talking millions of acres of wet, tangled beauty. Picture waterlogged meadows, sedge-rich swamps, and oxbow lakes curled like fossilized snakes across the terrain. It was squishy, mosquito-infested paradise. But to early European settlers, it was useless. See, swamps didn't grow wheat. They didn't pasture cattle well. And you couldn't build a church on a bog without it slowly sinking like a stubborn cake in the oven. So they brought out the shovels. And later, the ditch plows. And finally, enormous pumping systems to wring the land dry. Starting in the 1800s, wetland drainage became an organized, funded, even celebrated project. States like Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, once swampy havens for beavers and birds, saw thousands of miles of drainage ditches cut like scars into the landscape. It wasn't subtle. People called it reclaiming the land, like they were rescuing it from nature itself. And here's where it gets surreal. You're standing in a place where 1 million years of ecosystem building got wiped away in a few generations. Gone were the marshes that cooled summers, filtered water, and stored carbon. In their place, tidy fields, silos, the occasional golf course. Not that it was all sinister. To be fair, draining the wetlands fed a lot of people. It created jobs. It built towns. But it also erased habitats that had existed since before humans even showed up. That's not something you undo with a few rain barrels and a plant-native species weekend workshop. Historians still argue whether the wetland collapse helped speed up extinctions like castroids. Some say the beavers were already doomed by climate shifts and predation. Others point to shrinking habitats, fragmented waterways, and the sudden dominance of humans who didn't think much of giant rodents clogging their future farmland. One thing's clear, the wetlands didn't just disappear on their own. You walk through a neighborhood now, cookie-cutter homes, plastic fences, a drainage pond that tries to look natural but mostly collects trash and goose poop. You glance at the street sign. It's something like Beaver Hollow Drive. Completely disconnected from the thing it's named after. You wonder if anyone here knows they're parked on top of what used to be one of the most biodiverse systems on the continent. Probably not. Maybe a few old-timers remember when their backyard was full of frogs. Maybe some kid finds a weird tooth while digging and doesn't realize it belonged to something that looked like a bear and swam like a torpedo. In the middle of the cul-de-sac, there's a man-made pond. Decorative. Ringed with mulch and rocks from the garden center. A sign warns people not to swim, probably because of algae blooms or snapping turtles. You walk up to it and peer in. It's lifeless. A little film on the surface. One carp circles lazily, like it forgot where it was going and gave up halfway. No insects buzzing. No cattails. Just water trying really hard to look wild. Here's a fun bit. Some old maps from the early 1800s show these wetlands labeled as miasmic or feverlands. Not because they were evil, but because people didn't understand how mosquitoes and bacteria worked. So instead of valuing the wetlands for their filtering power and biodiversity, they treated them like natural garbage dumps, scary, soggy breeding grounds for disease and inconvenience. So they went to war with them. Dig a ditch. Lay some tile. Let gravity and engineering do the rest. And in many ways, they won that war. But at what cost? There's a quiet price to draining a continent's kidneys. Increased flooding, soil loss, salinization, dead zones downstream. All these things are boring until they show up in your backyard. And that brings us to modern times. Today, you'll hear people talk about wetland restoration. Noble work, good intentions. But honestly, it's like trying to stitch moss back onto a rock. You can bring some water back, replant a few rushes, maybe convince a muskrat to set up shop. But rebuilding a functioning wetland, that's a long game. Especially when the land underneath it has been bulldozed, backfilled, and compacted by decades of agricultural boots. Still, hope exists in weird places. A few farmers in Minnesota decided to stop fighting the muck and started farming cranberries. A surprising number of retired drainage ditches have quietly filled back in and now support herons again. And some conservationists are even experimenting with beaver mimicry devices, fake dams made of sticks and mud designed to slow water and invite real beavers back. You heard that right. Humans building fake beaver dams to get actual beavers to notice and move in. Nature's version of catfishing. As you leave the suburb and follow an old creek bed, barely a trickle now, you come across a patch of cattails. Unexpected. Message. A little rebellious. You step into it and feel the ground soften. The air changes. Cool, humid life. A dragonfly lands on your sleeve like it's checking in. You sit. This, right here, is what was lost. And somehow, it's still trying to come back. Maybe not for the giant beavers. Their time has passed. But for everything else, the frogs, the herons, the orchids with names that sound made up, it's not too late. They're patient. They're stubborn. Kind of like you, still listening, even though we've been talking about mud and rodents for an hour now. The sun dips low. The cattails sway. A breeze picks up and rustles the leaves like soft applause. You breathe deep, and for a second, it almost feels like the wetlands never left. Almost. You wake to the steady drumming of rain on leaves, but not just any rain. This is that slow, persistent kind that soaks in deep and wakes the earth's scent, making everything smell like fresh dirt mixed with something ancient and green. You breathe it in and realize you're standing at the edge of a large, slow-moving river. It's the kind of waterway that's been carving its path for thousands of years, reshaping the landscape in ways you barely notice but which make all the difference. This river isn't just water flowing downhill. It's a lifeline for the wetlands, a conveyor belt of nutrients, seeds, and creatures moving through the mosaic of marshes and forests. Without it, those vast prehistoric swamps would have been dry fields long ago. And here's the kicker. The giant beaver was not just a tenant of these wetlands, it was a master builder. Oh, scratch that. It was a mega builder. Castroids didn't just hang out waiting for food to float by. It engineered its environment in ways that shaped the water itself. Think about modern beavers. They build dams that create ponds, slow water flow, and create habitat for dozens of species. Castroids? It took that idea and cranked it up to a ridiculous scale. Imagine a dam so big it could reroute water, create islands, and expand wetlands by miles. The fossil evidence suggests that giant beavers cut down trees, not just for food, but for construction. Their teeth could gnaw through trunks that would make a lumberjack pause. And their lodges? Massive, complex structures that would have been the closest thing to a fortress in the swamp. Historians still argue whether Castroids was a true dam builder or if it mostly relied on natural features and smaller constructions, but recent discoveries lean toward the former. Some researchers have found fossilized dam remains in deposits that match the time of these creatures' reign, with felled logs arranged in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. So, you're picturing this giant rodent engineering its watery kingdom, one tree at a time. You stand on the bank and imagine the scene. The water column on one side of the dam, a bustling pond full of plants and fish, while on the other side, the current pushes along, carrying seeds and insects downstream. You can almost hear the sound of wood scraping against wood, the occasional splash of a beaver tail slapping the water to warn of danger. This is ecosystem engineering at its finest. And it wasn't just about comfort for the beaver. By slowing water flow, these dams help trap sediments, build soil, and create diverse habitats. Fish spawned in the calm pools. Birds nested in the flooded trees. Insects multiplied in the warm, stagnant water. The whole wetland got a boost. Now, here's a quirky detail that most people don't know. These giant beavers might have been able to build underwater lodges. Modern beavers build their homes partially underwater, with entrances submerged to avoid predators. Castroids, with its size and swimming ability, could have done the same, but on a grander scale. Fossils found with preserved footprints suggest they were comfortable digging tunnels below water surfaces. Which raises the question, how did they communicate? How did they warn each other about predators or approaching humans? Slapping tails? Vocalizations? The occasional wet slap of an oversized paw? Historians still argue about that too. There's no audio fossil, obviously, but the evidence of social behavior is intriguing. Some suggest they may have lived in small family groups, like modern beavers, while others think they were more solitary. Whatever the truth, you can't help but admire the persistence and ingenuity of these animals. It's like they took the beaver blueprint and built a mega version for the Ice Age wetlands. One of those felled trees probably made the perfect perch for a giant dragonfly, whose wings glisten in the sun like stained glass. You spot one now, buzzing lazily as if it's had one too many prehistoric cocktails. And just when you think this wetland can't get any more alive, you hear a low rumble. No, not thunder. A castroid's pushing through the reeds, its tail leaving a wide wake behind. It pauses, looks at you with tiny, dark eyes, and then, just like that, vanishes into the watery forest. You blink and the river flows on, carrying the secrets of a lost world. You're standing on the cracked edge of a drying lake bed now. The mud beneath your boots is hard, dusty, and marked by deep fissures, like the earth itself is trying to shrug off its wet past. This place wasn't always so barren. It used to be a sprawling wetland, a watery labyrinth full of life, but now it's a ghost of itself. A reminder of how climate shifts and time march on, often with little regard for the creatures who call these places home. It's a stark scene, but it's one that tells a bigger story, how the end of the Pleistocene era turned the world upside down. The last ice age had started to loosen its icy grip about 12,000 years ago. Temperatures crept up, glaciers melted, and the landscape changed faster than anyone expected. Lakes shrank, wetlands dried, and forests crept in where water once ruled. It was a slow-motion environmental upheaval that affected every living thing. And the giant beaver? It was caught right in the middle. Castoroids thrived in cold, wet environments, places with abundant aquatic plants and stable water sources. As the climate warmed, those conditions started to vanish. Droughts became more frequent. Rivers changed course. Wetlands fragmented into smaller pockets, disconnected and vulnerable. Scientists still debate how much climate change alone drove the extinction of giant beavers. Some argue it was the primary cause, making their habitat unlivable. Others say it was a deadly 1-2 punch combined with human hunting pressure. You'll hear a lot of different takes, but the truth probably lies somewhere in between. One interesting fact: pollen records from sediment cores show a sharp decline in wetland plants like cattails and sedges around the time the beavers disappear. It's like the giant beavers buffet just got taken off the menu. But here's a quirky twist. Some researchers propose that giant beavers themselves might have contributed to habitat changes. By over-harvesting trees for their dams and lodges, they could have altered the vegetation patterns enough to impact the wetland stability. A kind of beaver-induced habitat feedback loop gone wrong. A little ironic, isn't it? The animals that shaped their environment so well might have also pushed it into instability. You stare at the cracked mud and can't help but imagine those massive lodges slowly falling apart as water disappeared. The creatures inside forced to move or starve. It's a somber thought. But it's not all doom and gloom. Remember those hardy, adaptable creatures we talked about? The peccaries, the short-faced bears, the dire wolves? They survived longer, some making it well into the Holocene. They adapted, shifted diets, moved ranges. It's a testament to nature's resilience. And yet, the giant beaver's story ends here, in the drying mud, the vanishing marsh. You kick a pebble, watching it bounce into a crack. As the sun sets, the sky paints itself in fiery oranges and purples. The silhouettes of distant trees stand like dark sentinels against the fading light. You take a deep breath. Sometimes extinction feels like a sudden event, but really it's a drawn-out process. Slow, relentless, like water wearing down stone. You step away from the lakebed and onto higher ground. The world shifts again. Different animals, different plants, different challenges. But the mark of the giant beaver lingers. In fossils, in the stories we tell, and in the wetlands that stubbornly try to come back. You turn one last time, catch a glimpse of a dragonfly skimming the air, and realize you're standing on the edge of a story millions of years in the making. You find yourself at the edge of a dense forest now, where the wetland's soggy fingers retreat into thickets of towering trees. The air here smells like damp bark and earth, but with an undercurrent of something older, decay, growth, and something just a little wild. You step carefully over fallen branches and leaf litter, mindful that this is a place where every sound echoes. You're not alone. Listen closely, and you can hear the faint rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. A quick flash of fur disappears into a hollow log. A chorus of birds bursts into song and then falls silent, like they just remembered something urgent. It's a different world here than the open wetlands, a quieter, more secretive ecosystem where life clings to shadows and soil. And guess who's lurking here too? The giant beaver's cousins. Modern beavers, smaller and more modest, have made these woods their home. But back then, their prehistoric kin roamed these very trees, gnawing, cutting, building. You can almost hear the chomp 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 of giant teeth against bark, a steady rhythm that shaped the forest edge and waterline. Now, here's a tidbit most folks don't know. Castoroids probably wasn't just a water dweller. Its fossilized limb bones suggest it was capable of moving on land better than modern beavers, which spend most of their time swimming. It could lumber through forests, maybe even clear trails, which might explain how it could access food sources beyond the water's edge. Historians still argue about how much time giant beavers spent on land versus water. Were they primarily aquatic engineers? or did they forage extensively on land? The evidence is conflicting, but what's clear is that they weren't stuck in one habitat. They were versatile. As you trudge through leaf mold and moss, you spot a tree marked by huge tooth scars, deep grooves gouged into the bark. That's a signature move of a giant beaver, or at least their distant relatives. The sheer size of these marks makes you think of a giant furry lumberjack on a mission. You imagine the impact that such animals had on their environment, not just shaping waterways but also influencing forest composition. By cutting down trees, they opened up spaces that allowed sunlight to hit the forest floor, encouraging a different set of plants to grow. This, in turn, attracted new animals, creating a cascade of ecological effects. Here's a quirky detail. Some paleontologists speculate that giant beavers may have helped maintain early fire breaks by clearing vegetation along waterways, inadvertently slowing the spread of wildfires. No direct proof yet, but it fits with the idea that these animals were ecosystem engineers on a grand scale. And speaking of wildfires, the Pleistocene wasn't immune to them. Dry seasons brought flames roaring through the forests, forcing all creatures, including giant beavers, to adapt or move on. You can almost smell the smoke, feel the heat that must have driven animals toward the wetlands for refuge. You pause by a fallen log, thick with moss and fungi, and rest your hand on its rough surface. It's a quiet moment, but your mind races with the thought of how many lives intersected here: beavers, bears, birds, and humans all woven into the same ancient tapestry. Then, a flicker in the shadows, a glimpse of a dark shape darting through the trees. Maybe a fisher, maybe a wolf, or perhaps something less understood, like the short-faced bear still roaming these woods long after the beaver's time. You feel the weight of time settling in your bones. This forest has seen more life, more change, than any calendar can capture. And somewhere, deep in the mud and roots, the legacy of the giant beaver whispers through the soil. You find yourself in a clearing now, where the forest gives way to a patchwork of fields and meadows, tangled with wildflowers and grasses that wave lazily in the breeze. The air is light and fragrant, carrying the subtle hum of bees and the distant chatter of birds. It feels like a calm moment in a world that's been anything but calm. This place, this patch of earth, might seem ordinary to most people. But if you know where to look, it's a snapshot of change, a point where the ancient wetlands, forests, and meadows all converge. And it's here you start to see the long shadow the giant beaver cast, beyond just bones and fossils. Fast forward a few thousand years, past the Ice Age, past human settlement, past land reclamation and drainage ditches. This land begins to evolve again, slowly but surely. Modern ecosystems, though different, carry echoes of those lost wetlands. The water-loving plants, the animals that depend on ponds and slow streams, even the soil's texture, they all bear the imprint of past beaver activity, both ancient and modern. Here's something you might find surprising. Scientists have discovered that beavers today, both the familiar ones and their close relatives, play a critical role in maintaining biodiversity. They create wetlands that support hundreds of species, from amphibians and fish to birds and insects. In fact, in places where beavers have been reintroduced after local extinction, entire ecosystems have bounced back in ways that scientists call ecosystem engineering. Beavers, it turns out, are the original wetland architects. And the giant beaver? Well, it was the first version of that architect, just on a bigger scale. Historians still argue about the extent to which giant beaver behavior influenced early human cultures. Some suggest that indigenous peoples recognized the beaver's role in shaping the environment and incorporated it into their stories and practices. Others think the connection was more indirect, with humans adapting to landscapes that had already been altered by these massive rodents. You walk across the clearing and spot a cluster of wildflowers you recognize: marsh marigolds, their bright yellow petals standing out against the green. They thrive in wet soil, the kind of place giant beavers would have favored. Nearby, a chorus frog croaks, a tiny reminder of the wetlands that once were. This spot feels alive with continuity. Life finds a way, even after giants vanish and landscapes transform. But it also reminds you of fragility. The meadows are dotted with invasive plants, species brought in by human hands, accidentally or not, that outcompete native flora. The soil shows signs of erosion where trees were cleared, and water levels fluctuate more wildly than they should. It's a subtle, ongoing struggle. The wetlands fought hard to survive the last few centuries, but now face new challenges: climate change, pollution, urban sprawl. You crouch down and run your fingers through the soil, feeling the grit and moisture. You think about the giant beaver, about all the water it moved, the habitats it created, and how much of that has been lost. Yet, in this quiet moment, you also feel a flicker of hope. Because this land, scarred but healing, still supports life. It still breathes. And with care, it might just thrive again. You stand, brush the dirt from your hands, and look out over the patchwork of fields and woods. The sun is dipping low, casting long shadows that mingle with the wildflowers. You realize that stories like the giant beavers aren't just about the past. They're blueprints for understanding how to live with nature today. And maybe, just maybe, to let a few more giants shape the world again. You're now sitting by a quiet stream, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish darting beneath. The air carries that unmistakable wetland mix of earth and decay, but also a faint hint of pine and something sharp, maybe a whiff of smoke from a distant campfire. You're somewhere between the wild and the human world, caught in that blurry boundary where history, nature, and culture blend. Here's where things get really interesting. The relationship between humans and giant beavers was probably more complicated than simple predator and prey. It might have been a story of respect, coexistence, even spiritual connection. You've heard the tales, the giant beaver as a monster, a pest, a resource. But indigenous stories from the regions once flooded by those lost wetlands hint at a deeper bond. The beaver appears in myths as a creator, a transformer, a teacher. It's said to have shaped the land by diving deep and bringing up earth from the bottom of the water to form islands. A helper in the making of the world. And this isn't just poetic fluff. Anthropologists studying indigenous oral traditions have found recurring themes that link the giant beaver's legacy to cultural identity and environmental knowledge. Historians still argue how much these stories reflect actual encounters with castoroids versus smaller beavers, but the overlap in time and place makes it tempting to think that some of these legends grew from first-hand experience. Imagine a community watching the beaver's massive dams change the flow of rivers, create new ponds, alter the availability of fish and plants. That kind of power wouldn't go unnoticed. And it might even have shaped settlement patterns, resource use, and spiritual beliefs. On the practical side, giant beaver remains, bones, teeth, and even tools made from their parts have been found at some early human sites. This shows they weren't just stories. These animals were part of daily life, part of survival. One fringe theory suggests that early humans may have actively managed beaver populations, encouraging their dam building to shape landscapes for fishing or agriculture. It's speculative, but it challenges the simple narrative of humans as just hunters and destroyers. You watch a heron stand motionless at the water's edge, a living echo of the ecosystem the giant beaver helped create. Its patient stillness contrasts with the slow but unstoppable changes humans brought. There's a kind of beauty in this complexity. Humans didn't just conquer nature. They interacted with it, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. The giant beaver sits right at that crossroads. You pick up a smooth stone from the streambed and roll it in your hand. It feels like a token from a lost time. As evening falls, the light softens, and the wetland sounds grow louder, frogs calling, insects buzzing, water trickling. You lean back and let your thoughts drift, carried by the gentle rhythm of the land. You're walking along a dusty trail now, the sun hanging low and orange in the sky like it's trying to stretch the day as long as possible. The air is dry, a sharp contrast to the wetlands you've been moving through, and the scent of sage and dry grass fills your nostrils. You're approaching the fringes of human civilization, but nature still grips this place fiercely. It's a landscape of transition, where wilderness starts to give way to farms, towns, and roads. And it's here you see the final echoes of a lost world struggling to persist. Because giant beavers didn't just vanish from thin air. Their extinction was part of a bigger story, one that includes the rapid reshaping of North America's landscape by people. By this time, roughly 10,000 years ago, Humans had started spreading fast. Their tools became more sophisticated, their hunting strategies more efficient, and the pressure on large animals like giant beavers, mastodons, and giant ground sloths increased. There's still heated debate about how much humans contributed to these extinctions versus climate change. Some scientists argue that overhunting pushed vulnerable species over the edge, while others think habitat loss from shifting climates was the main culprit. Likely, it was a messy combination of both. Here's a wild detail. Some early archaeological sites suggest humans might have scavenged giant beaver carcasses, not just hunted them. That would imply an opportunistic approach, taking what they could when it was available rather than systematically targeting them. That said, giant beavers were big, but not easy targets. Their aquatic lifestyle, dam refuges, and size gave them some protection. But humans adapted. They developed better tools, coordinated group hunts, and eventually spread into nearly every corner of the continent. You pause at a clearing and see a small group of deer grazing cautiously. Their alertness hints at a world full of unseen threats, one shaped by predators both natural and human. The wetlands you've walked through, once sprawling, rich, alive, were slowly squeezed by drainage, agriculture, and urban expansion. What was once a vast network of watery highways for giant beavers and their neighbors became patchy remnants, islands of green surrounded by human-made deserts. Still, pockets remain. Protected wetlands, restored habitats, and quiet places where nature fights back. You remember the phrase historians debate, whether humans were caretakers or conquerors of the land. Maybe it wasn't all black and white. Maybe it was complicated, messy, and deeply intertwined. The giant beaver story is part of that tapestry, one of adaptation, survival, loss, and transformation. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of all those centuries pressing lightly on your shoulders. As you look back toward the horizon, the fading light catches on the silhouette of a tree shaped like a giant beaver's tail. It's an odd coincidence, or maybe a subtle wink from history. You smile, because even though the giants are gone, their legacy still ripples through the water and soil. And so do you. You stand on the edge of a quiet pond at dusk, the water's surface smooth as glass, reflecting the soft glow of a fading sky. Around you, the air cools, carrying the subtle scent of wet earth and whispering reeds. It feels like the end of a long journey, not just through place, but through time itself. Here, the story of the giant beaver reaches its last chapter, but its echoes are everywhere, in the wetlands, the forests, the myths, and the very soil beneath your feet. You remember the massive teeth that could gnaw through trees, the towering dams that reshaped waterways, the marshes that teemed with life. You recall the quiet drama of predators lurking, humans watching, and nature's endless dance of survival. And now, with the world changed so profoundly, the giant beaver is gone. Extinct. A memory carved in stone and whispered in the rustling cattails. But this loss isn't just about an animal disappearing. It's about change, about what happens when environments shift faster than creatures can adapt, when humans move into wild places and remake them, often without understanding the full cost. There's a strange comfort in this reflection, because even in extinction, life persists. The wetlands try to return. Beavers, smaller but no less determined, build new dams. Frogs croak, dragonflies flit, and the water moves on. You sit by the pond's edge, watching the first stars blink awake in the darkening sky. The world is quiet now, softening like a lullaby. And as you settle in, you think about what this all means. The giant beaver's story isn't just about the past. It's a mirror held up to us. A reminder that the wild things we take for granted weren't always here, and might not be tomorrow. You close your eyes and feel the cool breeze wrap around you, a gentle, endless rhythm. The sound of water lapping, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird. You're part of this story now. The story of loss and hope, destruction and renewal. And as sleep pulls you under, you can almost hear the splash of a giant tail, just beneath the surface, steady, timeless, and full of life. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night deepens around you, quiet and vast. The world feels softer now, like a whispered secret shared between old friends. Imagine the wetlands settling into their own calm rhythm, the gentle sway of cattails in the breeze, the soft ripple of water touched by moonlight, and the delicate chorus of frogs singing their lullabies. Even the giant beaver, once a titan of this watery realm, rests beneath layers of time, its story woven into the fabric of the earth. You're safe here, in this moment, cradled by history and nature's slow breath. All the sprawling landscapes, the creatures, the ancient dramas, they're a part of you now, gently folding into your thoughts as you drift. Remember, these stories remind us that change is constant, but so is resilience. The wetlands may fade and return, life will adapt, and we will keep watching, learning, and dreaming. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, let the soft sounds of the night guide you deeper into rest. The world can wait. Tomorrow holds new stories, new journeys. But for now, let the peaceful hush of this lost world lull you into sweet dreams. Sleep well.